On the evening of the 13th of May 2021, a Beechcraft Baron 95 B-55 aircraft, registered VHCBG, departed Ceduna Airport, South Australia. The charter flight was conducted under IFR to Parafield Airport, South Australia, with a pilot and one passenger on board. During the flight, the pilot noted that when the autopilot was engaged, the aircraft was snaking left to right. When nearing Parafield Airport, the aircraft was cleared for a night visual approach and descended. During the approach, the autopilot system did not function as the pilot expected, and they became distracted and lost situational awareness. The pilot lost sight of the runway and inadvertently overflew the airport outside the circling area. They were heading towards rising terrain at a level well below the minimum safe altitude. The tower controller requested confirmation that the pilot was returning to the airport and informed them that they were no longer in controlled airspace. This prompt from the controller allowed the pilot to regain some situational awareness. With the aircraft still travelling south away from the airport, the controller requested confirmation that the pilot could see the airport. The pilot acknowledged and turned the aircraft towards Parafield Airport. The pilot reported visual to the tower and were cleared for a visual approach before landing safely.
What do we think was going on for the pilot that resulted them flying into a dangerous situation?
We know that distractions reduce safety margins. Equipment is the key distraction. And so in this case, this probably led to the pilot coming in at the high inbound speed, tracking directly overhead the runway rather than in the downwind position. And that led them to mistakenly thinking they were turning base, but instead turning and tracking directly into the nose circling area.
The distraction too with the autopilot has caused a big focus on what essentially was a non-critical item in the aircraft. We could have stopped this some time before they got to the coast by actually turning it off and hand flying the aircraft.
So looking at this, having seen a number of aircraft getting disoriented at night on visual approaches, this is another case of a pilot being somewhere they didn't think they'd be on a visual approach at night. In a lot of airfields, may have minimal implications because it's relatively flat around it. Adelaide, highly complex area with terrain, with adjacent airspace, both restricted associated with Edinburgh and Class C associated with Adelaide, and other traffic too. There was other traffic in the circuit area at the time at night. So that's where things start to line up and you go, okay, a simple benign issue with a aircraft serviceability piece of equipment can then result in more serious issues happening downstream, resulting in an aircraft being below an appropriate lower safe altitude at night, in this case outside a circling area, outside controlled airspace.
Some of the elements of situational awareness and lack of it is not knowing where you are on a vertical scale, not knowing where you are on a horizontal scale, and also not being at the appropriate airspeed. So really we've got all three elements of that in this situation.
From what I'm hearing, human factors played a significant role in this. Matt, what other human factors were involved?
The key part is situational awareness. It's an element of human factors that covers perception. So what am I perceiving? What inputs am I getting to give me the ability to use cognition, understand what actually that means to me, what is happening, where am I? And then going forward with the projection, using that information to go, where will I be? So looking at three key parts in that what has happened, what is happening, and what will happen.
Both the pilot and the controller, they weren't on the same page. They didn't have that shared mental model.
Yeah, that can quite easily occur. So usually an aircraft being issued an instruction, a visual approach, join a certain leg of the circuit, and then a readback of that can indicate both to the pilot and the controller that communication has occurred and everything is going as it should. That's where it's understandable, due to many circumstances that cause this event, that both ended up not sharing the same mental model. That's the key bit, why we have instructions, readbacks, mandatory reporting points, standard procedures, keeping everything as standard as possible so we can handle the abnormal or can free up capacity for both controllers and pilots and other airfield and airspace users to have that capacity to deal with the unexpected.
Unfortunately in this case, the pilot did call visual, and of course that triggers the air traffic controller to provide additional instructions, all based on that call. It's a very black and white answer, but unfortunately the two of them have ended up in very different directions as a result of that. We know that the pilot was very familiar with Parafield, so the instructions that they got in terms of a slight left turn, in their mind, put them onto downwind. and assumed that they were on downwind. Although they were getting instructions, it all fitted perfectly with their usual daytime arrival into Parafield, and that's what's put them essentially into a really messy situation and potentially very dangerous.
Matt, what's the criteria for an aircraft coming in at visual approach at night?
The key part of a ATC issuing a visual approach either by day or by night is for an IFR aircraft, the report of visual. It is significant depending on day or night or certain conditions. So pilots need to be aware of what being visual actually means. And then from ATC's perspective, once they've declared that, ATC will then issue an instruction to allow them to operate below an applicable lower SAF altitude. So by day, it's quite simple. Terrain and obstructions are much easier to see, weather dependent of course, but by night, we protect both VFR and IFR aircraft from terrain until they are established within a certain dimension from the airfield or established on an element of vertical guidance. If it's a straight-in visual approach at night, there's further criteria too, and it will descend them to an appropriate lower SAF altitude, usually the 10 or 25 mile minimum sector altitude or a minimum vector altitude if that is available, to an appropriately qualified and approved air traffic control agency, which may be lower, and then once established on a visual guidance, so TVARs or PAPIs, clear visual approach, so once established on the PAPIs, clear visual approach, or if there's a glide path available, once established on the glide path, clear visual approach.
I think it's important too for pilots going into an aerodrome at night, whether they are familiar with it or not, is to first of all understand the definition of visual approach, what that actually means, what it means you are able to do, what you are permitted to do, but then also knowing what the resources are at the aerodrome. Does it have a PAPI? Does it have a TVARSI? Is there a glide slope available? Because that will determine how perhaps you set yourself up, where you are looking, what equipment you can still use inside the aircraft for that approach.
So if a visual approach can't be completed, what do pilots need to do?
So I think as soon as a pilot realises that things have gone bad, like in this situation, go around, conduct a missed approach. Even if you know the area, using air traffic control to help you get out of that situation, I think is critical.
What is a circling area and why is it important not to fly outside it?
Okay, for all IFR operations or operations below an appropriate lower SAF altitude, there needs to be an element of protection, an area an aircraft can fly. For an aircraft conducting a visual circling manoeuvre, it's a bit more complex. So they have an area of airspace around an aerodrome called a circling area, and that allows a safe area for an aircraft to descend below an appropriate lower SAF altitude, or in an instrument approach circling case, a minimum descent altitude. The key part of the circling area is making sure that the pilot knows their circling area and knows if there's any restrictions on that. So there might be obstructions or obstacles or terrain. In this case, there was the Adelaide Hills to the east, which created a large portion of that circling area on the charts being depicted as no circling. So in either night or IMC, there is no circling approved in that area. So pre-briefing where the aircraft is going and where you expect to circle is key, because in this case, the aircraft end up flying outside the circling area, and at night, there's no protection against terrain when that occurs.
That circling area is vital for us as IFR aircraft to manoeuvre appropriately for an approach, to get ourselves down to perhaps circuit height. And yes, it's going to vary depending on what size aircraft you're in. So going into an aerodrome, knowing how much room you have to play with, and knowing with situational awareness, where is that area that I cannot go? I must always remain, in case of Parafield, to the west. I cannot go to the east. That might change if you're flying in and out of Ceduna or Canberra or Sydney or Bankstown, wherever it is that you're going. So having that full awareness of where you're going and where the no-go zones are.
So what are some of the ways you all maintain your pilot and situational awareness?
For me, I keep an idea of what's coming up next. What tasks can I get done now where the workload is low? It might be an amount of administration tasks, it might be briefing a chart, preparing radio frequencies, getting a call for a bay, so that when I get a little bit closer to the airfield, all I'm doing is flying the aircraft. I've got the minimal amount of distractions and conscious particularly of ground speed. How quickly are events going to happen? How quickly am I approaching the airfield? What can I do about it?
What about all the VFR pilots out there? What can they glean from this incident?
Very similar lessons to those of an IFR pilot, but understanding that if you're arriving somewhere late and it is dark, that where you're coming into may look very, very different, even if you're very familiar with the site. And understanding that. And when things start looking different, when your interpretation, your understanding of that location starts deteriorating, when in doubt, ask for help. That is the moment to speak up, speak to ATC and get some guidance, whether it's a vector or even just a direction to look in to find the aerodrome.
Summing up, I guess, what do we think are the key takeaways from this incident?
The key takeaway for me is, I know it's That's third on the list of aviate, navigate, communicate, importantly, but communicate. So ATC will, if they identify it, and sometimes there can be a delay on this because they have an expectation, they're dealing with other traffic, they're dealing with other jobs that they have to do, they may not identify it straight away. But if you raise it, or if they see something and question you, they're not the big bad voice in the sky, they're there to help you. The whole point of ATC being there is to aid the safe and expeditious flow of air traffic. So don't be afraid to plain speak it, don't be afraid of, don't remember the exact AIP phrase, just plain speak it and go confirm runway location. You're directly over it. Okay, now we can start working from there. If it's a simple case of, oh no, you're established on downwind, or make a slight right turn to join left downwind, or vice versa, that can be the slight bit of communication that's required to keep you safe and keep all the other operators aware of where you are, to prevent a similar circumstance like this happening, which may in other circumstances result in a collision with terrain.
And there's nothing wrong with being honest and speaking up, saying, I need more time. Requesting a vector, requesting orbit, request a quick holding pattern at your current location. That may save you. It's going to put you in a safer position, whether it's using the correct runway, being in the right position, whether it's being around other airspace users, just taking that time in a safe location to get your thoughts together, work out where you are, correct that situational awareness, and then off you go.
What actually led and contributed to this occurrence was a distraction, and that is universal across the board. And focusing on something that wasn't essential at the time for the flight actually led to this situation, and that can apply with any breaching airspace potentially, or coming into conflict with other aircraft inadvertently. So I think that's a really important lesson to take away from this as well.
And the resources available?
CASA have developed these fantastic stay on track guides for guidance through both Class C and D airspace in our capital cities. They provide information on the radio calls required, things like the VFR lanes, and particularly airspace infringement locations, which is really crucial, particularly for VFR pilots.
And there's also a resource guide on human factors for pilots. So this is a resource guide essentially to help pilots in understanding human limitations and what we can do about them. And in particular, booklet 9's actually got a piece in there on distractions, which I think might be relevant. All of these things are available on the Pilot Safety Hub on CASA's website.
Great, well thanks everybody. Let's go through the key safety messages from this case study. Be aware at night things are different, including reduced visibility, so fly to the conditions. Remain focused on monitoring aircraft and approach parameters. If a visual approach cannot be completed, pilots must inform air traffic control so assistance can be provided. If the criteria for the safe continuation of an approach are not met, for example losing sight of the runway, pilots must initiate a go-around and attain a safe altitude to reduce the risk of colliding with obstacles or terrain.